What's going on, all you gamers? Today I'm going to be going over my thoughts on Outriders, and of course its DLC Worldslayer, and going over whether or not it's a game that can be saved. So if you want to know what I think about Outriders in its current state, then stay tuned. That's coming up next. So where do I start with Outriders? I have sank an absolutely ridiculous amount of time into Outriders, and I must admit that at times I've really enjoyed it. So don't think this is going to be a straight up video all about knocking it and saying how terrible it is, because honestly it's really not. However, things as they stand at the moment make it a bit of a tough sell. Do I think it's something that people will be playing further down the line, maybe 3 months or so? And unfortunately I'd have to say the answer is going to be no. Now, I jumped back into Outriders today and it was less than 30 minutes before I'd switched the game off and gone on to something else. I've played with quite a few friends on this game since its release, but slowly it's dwindled down to just myself. And I really hope that when the new DLC hit, Worldslayer hit, it was going to revitalise it a bit and make people who enjoyed the game come back to it. However, I truly believe they kinda missed the mark with it. And judging by the player base at the moment, so did quite a few people, as it seems an abundance of people have already moved on. Now, I really think this is a bit of a shame, as the game itself has a semi-decent plot, not the greatest by any means, but the campaign was far from bad, but where it really shines is in the weapons and armour designs, and the builds that you could create. I still think this has some of the most impressive weapons and equipment designs I've seen implemented in a game in ages. It's one of those games that when you find a new legendary weapon near the start, your eyes really tend to light up and you go over the stats, hoping you've got somewhat of a god roll. However, by the time the DLC hit, even though there were some amazing new goodies to pick up, I think the novelty was beginning to wear off a little, and I started to realise that whilst the gameplay was pretty solid and fun, the game itself had started to feel more like a chore, a little bit kind of work-like. The new expansion just wasn't what I'd expected. It was by no means bad, but it wasn't good. The campaign was quite short, at just around 3 hours or maybe a little under, and the main thing to get you invested in for the endgame was the Trials of Outriders. Before playing it, I really liked the sounds of it. A progressive dungeon you work towards in order to gear up and get better loot and gain levels and ascension points, in order to make your builds truly powerful. It sounded pretty awesome. However, after a few weeks in, and my beloved Pyro still not being near max level, the gear costs for upgrading were extortionate, the XP grind was just insane to say the least, and it made the whole thing just feel very over grindy. In fact, quite early on it became evident that running the Trials of Outriders over and over was going to become tedious pretty fast, especially when 2 of the bosses inside were almost identical, and then upon completing it, you managed to open up a secret area that again had another version of the same Arbiter boss. It's me! Be prepared to see this fella a lot, because you're gonna be fighting him over and over. Now, after a while there was a pretty big patch, an update of sorts that came out, that put into effect a lot of rebalancing and adjustments. To me, it really seemed more like they just shifted the meta to firepower, and a lot of builds now felt very underpowered. For how many hours people had put into the game, myself included, it was quite disheartening. No doubt it worked wonders for some builds, but for a lot of those anomaly builds they took an absolute kicking. And seeing as the game centres around character customization and having fun with your classes, the fact that you couldn't level up multiple classes because of how bad the XP grind was made the game feel a little bit monotonous, as you ran through the Trials of Outriders over and over again, fighting very similar bosses. And like I said, with the patch they did change a few things. They gave you an extra 10% XP, however because of the nerfs to most of the things in the game, it meant you were running things slower. So you did in fact lose out on XP rather than gain it, because of how slow you were managing to complete things. It really felt to me that the patch had been chucked in, rather than to balance, to in fact lengthen people's playing time just because they'd have to grind for gear sets that they wouldn't usually want to grind for. Now, along with the XP grind being insanely off, there are several other big issues still in the game, even to this day. For example, the fact that even after all this time you could play multiplayer, and your character can get stuck through the floor when he activates one of his skill moves, usually the movement skills, such as boulder dash for the Devastator, or jump over to your Trickster and hunt the prey is still very hit and miss. Considering this is the fundamentals of your game class, and how long this game's been at, it's definitely an issue that still shouldn't be around. Also, before the game was released, they said that anyone who was caught cheating would have a big old watermark on their screen, meaning that they wouldn't be able to upload video footage. They were going to try and use it as a bit of a deterrent. This never came to fruition, and now there's quite a few modded lobbies, modded guns, and quite a few people with an advantage in the game. If they're playing solo, fair enough, a lot of people tend to do that on PC, but from what I've heard, when people jump into them, if their multiplayer is enabled, it can in fact even corrupt your data. I've not had this myself, but that sounds absolutely awful, especially with how long it takes you to actually level up in this game. Now, at its very core, Outriders is still a decent game. However, at this late stage, it's becoming a little bit evident that there's just not enough to keep people coming back for more. Done slightly differently, maybe a randomly generated endgame dungeon, possibly even a horde mode, as they always tend to extend the life of a game, especially if it had nice rewards in it, or maybe even an old school system in place where you beat bosses, earn tokens that you can turn in for rewards that you can only get that way. There was definitely a lot of things that could have increased the game's shelf life that just weren't implemented. One such thing was loadouts. This game was all about having an absolute abundance of gear, trying out different styles, trying out different builds. Not having loadouts just made things a whole bunch harder, and even now it's still not implemented, making it very difficult to keep hold of your armour and such, as often you'd struggle to keep hold of it or you'd accidentally dismantle it. Now, they have finally put an item lock in place which really helps, but honestly it seemed a little bit too little too late, and loadouts would have helped this game massively from the start. Now, I could go on and on, but it's going to sound like I'm moaning, whereas I actually really enjoyed playing this game. I'm really hoping that instead of seeing this game as a bit of a miss, people can maybe make a sequel that addresses a lot of the issues and improves upon the core gameplay, or makes the game very, very similar. As done right, this game could in fact be something pretty special. However, at the moment, do I think that further down the line, some DLC, some patches, some updates can fix Outriders enough to make it playable for a lot of players again and have a high player base? Unfortunately, I don't think it will. The game is well worth playing through for people that haven't played it, but I can't see a lot of people sticking around. Like I said, I think they'd probably need a fresh game in order to fix the underlying issues that they have with this one, especially when most people probably left the game before they even hit the next level on that Worldslayer. But yeah, let me know in the comments what you all think. Are you still playing Outriders? Have you given up ages ago? What would you think to an Outriders 2? Let me know in the comments. But as always, Full Things Gaming, Full Things Xbox. Take care. I'll see you on next day.